You bought, or at least you're attracted to the X100VI because of how it looks, and if it helps you get out and shoot, nothing at all wrong with that. But straight out of the box, the camera is still a little bit incomplete. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm Chris Hagan, a video producer and photographer in Portland, Oregon, and I am mature enough to admit that the retro feel and look of the X100VI influenced my decision, but so did how small it is. And when I say it's incomplete, I mean it's not weather sealed without an adapter and filter in front of the lens, which then begs the question, do you go with a standard UV filter or do you take advantage of the many filters available that give your images more of a unique look? I think you know my answer, and I'm definitely sure that every single photo I've snapped with the X100VI has been with some sort of diffusion filter on the front of the lens. I'm also sure that I've found my preferred filter for the summer, but we're gonna get to that. For now, I want to point out that not all of these photos look the same. There are some pretty big differences in terms of color and what the diffusion filter affects most, contrast. That's because obviously these filters have different effects and strengths of diffusion, and because while something like a 1/4 mist filter can be pretty strong in certain situations, the deciding factor for how the image looks is in the processing, be that in the camera or in your editing software. So, as someone who shares the straight out of camera JPEGs most of the time, at least up until this point, when shooting with the X100VI, I like diffusion filters because they add a little bit of extra sauce to the image that makes it stand out. So, what have I used most often? That would be a 1/4 mist filter, specifically one with a built-in circular polarizer, and more on that polarizer in just a second. But when it comes to the mist element, I've absolutely loved it, especially when shooting with a light on an angle. Its best feature to me is how it transitions the light from the highlights to the shadows. Where normally the light would dive off a proverbial cliff and be this harsh jolt from light to dark, a mist filter softens that harsh light and gives it a natural roll off into the shadows and the darker parts of the image. So why use a filter with a circular polarizer? Well, similar reasoning to why I like using a mist filter in the first place. For images that come straight out of the camera, I want to have flexibility when capturing the image, since what I see is what I get. A circular polarizer helps improve images in a few ways. Most notably, it removes reflections, which can be essential for photographing things like cars or bodies of water reflecting sunlight, or even just basic window reflections when you need to get them out of the way. Polarizers can also enhance contrast and color. Again, things that I can bring back myself if I were editing, but if I'm not editing, it helps to be able to capture it in camera. The primary con to a circular polarizer is going to be using it with a lens hood on. Because they need to rotate in order to adjust how it affects which parts of your image, you really can't shoot with a lens hood on because you won't be able to easily access the edges of the polarizer to physically rotate it. Now, I know there are plenty of people that shoot without a lens hood, but in doing so, you're exposing your diffusion filter to more light that could potentially wash out big chunks of the image. It's a glaring weakness. I'm a dad, so I can make these jokes. Let me show you what I'm talking about. On these photos hiking, you'll notice that when the sun hits the top of the image, the light spreads and washes out a lot of what's going on elsewhere. To stop that from happening, I had to put my left hand over the top of the lens while keeping the camera steady and shooting with my right. Sometimes I did it successfully. Other times you can literally see my hand at the top of the frame, and that's no good. The fix, and what I think I'm going to be rocking this summer, is Freewell Circular Polarizer plus Glow Mist Filter with lens hood. Now, being fully transparent, Freewell did reach out to me and send this setup that I do get to keep, but this is not a sponsored video and there wasn't even any obligation to make a full video about this filter. So just know I wouldn't be featuring it unless I actually used it and found it really helpful. And how it helps should be pretty obvious. With this setup, you've got everything we've talked about, plus a hood to keep light from hitting the lens when you don't want it to. It's simple to put together. You start by removing the front ring from the X100. This works with the X100VI and X100V, by the way. Then you screw on the adapter ring, the filter, then the lens hood, which is held securely in place by a rubber ring similar to other lens hoods made for this camera. It also comes with a lens cap that fits securely over the hood. I'll be honest, I like the look of it, which does matter. And most important, I haven't found it any more cumbersome to carry around or tuck away. The camera still fits in the center console of my car, our diaper bag, and certainly any camera bag. It comes in silver and black, which matches whichever color of the camera you have, keeping everything looking sleek and discreet. It also kind of makes things look like a Leica Q with the squared off edges of the lens hood. Just saying. And when it comes to using the polarizer, you've got a tab that sticks out just a little bit that allows you to rotate the filter to your liking. Now, I have seen mixed reviews about it. Some people say they tend to bump that tab every now and then or think it turns a little too easily. That has not been the case for me though. If anything, sometimes I've gone to reach for the aperture ring and found that polarizer tab instead, but that's really not a big deal. I actually found it helpful to have that tab because after a while, you kind of notice where it needs to be. For example, I know when shooting landscape, horizontal, if the tab is in one position, the polarizer's in the right place to keep the sky a bright blue. But if I rotate it about 90 degrees, now it's where I know it will reduce reflections. Same when shooting vertically. Without having to look through the viewfinder, I know if it's in the right place. I can compose and shoot without a second thought, most of the time. It just takes some of the confusion out of it, especially because this circular polarizer also has hard stops on each end, so you're not just spinning and spinning looking for the right position. I quickly found that I was pretty dialed in to the stops I needed to be at. Getting back to picture and video quality though, it performs just as well as any other mist filter I've used. Blooming highlights, softening shadows a bit, and just adding a little bit of flair to the image. For those who like to throw around the word cinematic and believe it correlates with this kind of look, yes, the footage you get with a mist filter does give a softer, reduced contrast look. Now, there seems to be a stigma around diffusion filters sometimes. I feel like people either love them as tools to get rid of some of the digital sharpness or hate them and call it just a phase we're in as creators. Some insist on doing it all in post. But entering broken record territory here for anyone that doesn't want to do any work in post to their photos or video, they're great tools to get you closer to your preferred style straight out of camera. But as I said before, for photos especially, aside from when a light source is hitting the lens directly, your camera's gonna have the biggest input in how the image turns out. So, especially for edited photos, you wouldn't even know some of these shots were taken with a mist filter on once I increase contrast or dehaze a little bit. I'll also add that if you're looking for a film photography look, or a better way to describe it, an imperfect look, a diffusion filter does help. Modern lenses are all so good that sometimes they lack the character and the flaws of the vintage lenses that are back in style or try to be emulated. A lot of people point out that the improved lens of the X100V and X100VI lacks the character of their predecessors. So if you want to take off that digital edge, this is probably one of the best ways. So before we finish up, here are a few things that you should know that I kind of picked up on through trial and error. One is not to be afraid to adjust your recipes a little bit. You may need to boost your shadows or darken them a little bit to maintain contrast if you find the filter removes more than you like. If you're using a recipe that reduces clarity a lot or adds a lot of grain, or maybe both, you may find your image a little too hazy. You'd essentially be adding diffusion on top of diffusion, and adding any light to that equation could really put you over the top. Also beware of uneven color luminance when shooting. If you're in between specific points rotating the polarizer, part of your sky, for example, might be dark while the other part is brighter, and it might look a little bit unnatural. Just something to keep an eye out for. And finally, as you may have noticed from looking at the physical filter, it is dark. that's the polarizer at work. It does remove 1 or 2 stops of light. So outdoors, really not much of an issue. Probably helps actually in bright daylight, but indoors, you might have to push the ISO a little more than usual. I gotta say though, I've used it indoors and outdoors and it comes recommended and checks all the boxes I'd expect it to. Even if you're skilled enough to add the diffusion effects in post, there's just something about the filter on the lens that has a unique look on the final product. I think Freewell has a great filter here, and it's also competitively priced. If you do plan on picking one up and want to support the channel, please use the affiliate link in the description. I'll make a little bit of commission off of it, but everything does help, and of course, it is much appreciated. Also, real quick before you go, do let me know what you think. Are you rocking a mist filter or another type of diffusion filter? I own way too many as it is, but I still want to know what everyone else is using. I find them all pretty interesting, especially when it comes to video, and I'm leaving the door open to check out more, especially if they're pretty fun to use. As always, thanks for watching, liking, subscribing, all of that, and I'll see you next time.